4 bloody attacks in 7 days, a week that has shaken Germany to the core. Will the nation ever be the same again? I'm Brent Goff, and this is The Day. A Syrian refugee blows himself up at a crowded music festival, the first ever suicide bombing on German soil. Islamic State claiming responsibility, the German government claiming no reason to worry, no reason to panic.
I understand that many people are troubled and worried. Our security authorities are ready. They will continue to do everything necessary to prevent a repeat of these incidents. However, there is no such thing as absolute security.
Tonight, what has the suicide bomber left behind beyond fear? Has Germany been changed forever? Also on the show, it's the week that's supposed to belong to Hillary Clinton. She'll get the Democratic nomination for U.S. president. Can she count on the entire party? Will she be strong enough to stop the Trump train?
If you want somebody who will scapegoat other people, peddle fear and smear, I'm not your candidate. I'm interested in bringing everybody together, rolling up our sleeves and getting to work to solve our problems.
Hello, everyone. We begin the day in a Germany traumatized and transformed. Tonight, all across the country, police units are out in force at airports, train stations, and bus terminals. The arteries of public movement have been reinforced after a week of unprecedented attacks. A week of killings and murders that culminated in the first ever suicide bombing inside Germany. It happened in the most unexpected and perhaps most normal of places, a town called Ansbach in Bavaria. A refugee from Syria blew himself up at a music festival. Well, now an entire nation is alarmed like never before. Bavaria's interior minister shared more disturbing news today about the bomber who made a video before the attack.
It explicitly declared the attack to be an act of revenge against the German people. That was because he said they were an obstacle to Islam. And because of the killing of Muslims. The video said some people had made their peace with life, and it promised that Germans would never again sleep soundly.
All right, let's rewind the clock for a moment. Now, last Monday, we reported on a 17-year-old refugee apparently inspired by so-called Islamic State, who used an axe and a knife to attack passengers on a train in Würzburg. It would be the start of a week of unprecedented bloodshed and violence. On Friday evening, a lone gunman went on a shooting rampage at a shopping center in Munich. He killed 9 people, and this tragedy is apparently the only attack of the week not carried out by a refugee. On Sunday, 2 attacks in one day. In the afternoon, a Syrian asylum seeker armed with a machete killed 1 person. And later that evening, in the Bavarian town of Ansbach, a suicide bomber blew himself up near a crowded music festival. We now know that he had arrived in Germany in 2014 from Syria. His asylum claim had been rejected. Our coverage continues now in the town of Ansbach.
Authorities are piecing together the evidence. The suspect was a 27-year-old Syrian. He came to Germany 2 years ago, but was refused asylum. His deportation was delayed because he was found to be psychologically unstable. The young man was known to police with a record of drug-related arrests, and he became radicalized. Bavarian authorities found a video on the attacker's phone in which he pledges allegiance to Islamic State and vows retribution on Germany for being an enemy of Islam. I think after this video, there can be no doubt that in the case of this attack, it is a terrorist attack with a corresponding Islamist background and a perpetrator who is convinced of Islamist ideology. Germany's first suicide bombing, Ansbach is asking why.
We live in a little town. Ansbach isn't the biggest town, and so we thought we were safe here. And then when I heard that explosion, the first thing I thought is it's happening. And I thought it was a nightmare at first, and then I thought my little sister might be dead, and I got so scared.
It was Sunday night in the Bavarian town when the assailant tried to enter an open-air music festival. When he was turned away, he detonated his device, concealed in a backpack. Carnage ensued.
I ran back towards the entrance, and at the entrance, there were already security people trying to see what was going on. I saw a man on the floor, his head, there was blood, and they tried to push me away, and I pushed through and tried to get back into the concert, and they let me in when I said my little sister was still in there.
Police searched the suspect's living quarters in an asylum hostel. There, they found bomb-making equipment and other evidence. An acquaintance at the hostel once asked the suspect how he felt about Islamic State.
He always said that, no, I'm not with them, I don't like them, and such stuff. But I think he had some issues because, he told lies so often without any reason.
As the people of Ansbach now know, even small towns are not safe from terrorist attack.
All right, we want to pull in our correspondent now, Erin Tilton. He is in the town of Ansbach. Good evening to you, Erin. You are there, the site of the first ever suicide bombing to take place on German soil. What have you been hearing from people there?
Well, a lot of the people I've been talking to have been expressing their anger and their disbelief that an attack like this could happen in Ansbach. Ansbach is a picturesque little community in Bavaria, and it's really kind of shows that German ideal that many tourists come to seek. There are beer gardens and just picturesque mountains everywhere, and people have never really thought that an attack like this could happen in a city like this. I've talked to several people who said that when they first heard the news, they just couldn't believe it. Another woman told me that her first thought was not now, not here, and expressed how worried she was that this was only the start of a wave of violence like we've seen in France in recent years.
And you know, what's even more striking about this story is Ansbach is a town that seems very normal, it seems very German, and it is a town that has taken in refugees. Have people been talking about that and what the attitude towards refugees, how that may be affected by this suicide bombing?
Yes, they have. I've talked to several people in the street who expressed their anger, saying that they've welcomed in so many refugees. They didn't understand why a refugee could actually carry out an attack like this. They also expressed their criticism of German Chancellor Angela Merkel and her policy of welcoming in so many migrants. However, others were quick to point out that they still support the policy. They didn't want to blame all refugees for a violent action carried out by one. And actually, some Ansbach residents have erected small signs around the square here. One of them says in very, very clear German, "Mein Hass kriegt er nicht." You won't get my hate, in a message directed directly at the attacker, and I'm assuming the Islamic State as well.
Yeah, and that's a real concern. That's a real fear, not only among policymakers and political leaders in the country, that attacks like this will actually drive a bigger wedge between Germans and the refugees. Do you get the sense that people are aware that this is exactly what terrorists want to see happen?
Very much so. Even some of the people I spoke to who expressed their anger about the German government's current policy said they didn't necessarily blame all the refugees. They actually were quick to point out that it was also a failing of the larger international community. While they said they were angry an attack like this happened here, many of them said you couldn't generalize and make general comments about all refugees based on the violent actions of one individual person.
All right, our correspondent Erin Tilton in the town of Ansbach tonight. Erin, thank you very much. I'd like to pull in now Dr. Frank Joyner. He is a clinical psychology professor. He specializes in post-traumatic stress disorders, especially in groups from crisis areas such as Syria. Dr. Joyner, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us tonight. 3 of the 4 attacks last week were committed by refugees from war-torn areas. Should someone have detected signs and been able to prevent these tragedies?
Yes, of course, if it would have been good if someone would have detected signs, but that's always easy to think in the aftermath of something that had happened. So it's always easy on the hindsight to find some clues and some indications. It is true that all of these 3 attacks were carried out by refugees, but that's also the only thing these 3 attacks have in common. So one was a clear act of domestic violence, and of course, we should keep our eyes open on indications of domestic violence, whether it happens from refugees or from Germans. And the 2 others were acts of terrorism. And acts of terrorism start with a radicalization process, and that is deliberately kept secret from others. So I think all of these incidents were extremely difficult to prevent.
You know, Dr. Joyner, when the refugees arrived last year, the German government was adamant about trying to integrate these people and also putting these people to work, trying to find jobs for them. But nothing was really said about mental health care for these people. And I mean, these are people who came to Germany. They'd lost everything, and they were leaving a country that had become a war zone. Isn't that where a big mistake was made?
Yeah, I agree. This was definitely a big mistake that was made. Now, almost 1 year has passed since the great influx of refugees has started. And still today, Germany has not invested much into a specialized mental health care system for refugees, although we are aware that a large minority of the refugees are severely traumatized. So we should do more. We should invest much more in mental health care for refugees, not just for the reason to make the Germans feel safer, because I think this is not the major problem, but to assist the refugees in integration and to reduce their suffering from their war trauma.
Yeah, Dr. Joyner, stand by. We want to take a closer look now at what happened in Munich. The city is still trying to work out why an 18-year-old gunned down 9 people and injured more than 20 before killing himself.
At the scene of Friday's massacre in the north of Munich, there's little sense of life returning to normal. Those who have gathered here are still in shock. Many stores in the mall near where the attack took place have opened their doors, but few have come to shop. I personally have no desire to shop. I'm shaking. I'll be happy when I can go home again. I'm simply going to cancel all dates and then we'll see. But life goes on. Around midday, the police and the Public Prosecution Department announced the latest developments in the story. A 16-year-old Afghan boy had been questioned by police as a possible witness, but later contradicted himself. We ascertained that just before the witness gave evidence to police, he deleted a WhatsApp chat on his mobile phone. The WhatsApp conversation is all the more important because it took place on the day of the shooting. And the two met, as we now know by reconstructing the WhatsApp chat, at 4 p.m. at the Olympia Center shopping mall in front of the restaurant. The teenager was arrested yesterday evening in his family's apartment in Munich. He's under suspicion of having known about his friend's intentions and the fact that he had a gun. However, investigators do not see him as an accomplice. The situation clearly shows that this is a case of an individual perpetrator. The way the crime unfolded, we have no indication that anyone else was involved. The youth was allowed to leave the police station this afternoon after police found no reason to hold him.
You know, you hear that story, Dr. Joyner. We also know that students at the school attended by the Munich gunman, they have said that he threatened to kill classmates. I mean, wasn't that an obvious sign that this person was mentally troubled?
Well, again, it's always easy on the hindsight to find clues that could have been there, and we are always interested in having these clues to keep our idea of being able to control what happens in the world active. This incident had happened 3 days ago, so everything we say right now is mere speculation. But if this whole incident was psychologically interesting, then in particular for the reason that it was a clear indication for the unreliability of eyewitnesses. And we had many people who were convinced that it was 3 people shootings, and that brought the police into a wrong direction for a long time. So we have to be very careful now about what people had heard in the beginning or had seen in the beginning. This can just be usual biases, and we have to wait for the investigations now.
Yeah, perceptions and reality sometimes can be worlds apart from each other. That is for sure. Dr. Joyner, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us on The Day tonight. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, in the studio with me now is our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane. Melinda, let's look at the politics of all of this. First of all, we have not heard from the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, since these attacks happened.
Since the latest incidents happened.
Yes.
We did hear from her last week following the knife attack in Würzburg.
Which was a week ago,
The young man on the train. We also heard from her after the Munich shootings, but we haven't heard from her today after these 2 most recent attacks, and with, as you've pointed out, a rising fear about the connection between these most recent attacks and the refugees who are here in Germany. The fact is, the Chancellor is not awfully proactive when it comes to communicating. She tends to be very cautious. She wants all the facts at her disposal before she speaks. She has a very measured way of speaking. And I think for that reason, you don't often see her get out in front of the wave. But this is certainly a case where I think a lot of people would like to see her move out there and try to allay some of the fears that we're seeing, and also to give people a sense that everything is being done, and yet at the same time that we need to be reasoned, we need to be measured in our response, and nobody is better at that than the Chancellor when she chooses to speak.
Exactly, and maybe she's seeing what is already being said. You've got the Bavarian State Interior Minister saying it's quite clear this was a terrorist attack, but the federal Interior Minister being much more cautious in his wording there. So you've got almost, 2 messages coming there. Why the discrepancy?
Well, these are conservative sister parties, in fact, but for the past year, they've been acting more like sisters who have a great big fight going on, very much about the refugee issue. The Bavarian Christian Social Union, the party of that Bavarian minister, has been warning about the consequences of too much migration for a long time. As you remember, they wanted a cap on migration last year, whereas the federal government, Angela Merkel's party, very much behind that open door policy. So they've got an old bone of contention here that is returning. And the fact is, how you label a problem very much determines how you act as a politician. If you stamp that label terrorism on it, then you're much more inclined to take certain kind of actions, which in fact the Bavarian minister is advocating: closer surveillance of refugees, more controls on refugees, more law and order type policies. Whereas if you say these are acts of mentally deranged young men under terrible strain, you might look to a different set of mental health issues, as you mentioned earlier. So we need to be very careful about the labels we're using, and we need to recognize that we are seeing a blurring of that category of terrorism, and that has serious implications for politics.
Yeah, blurring is definitely the right word with what's happening right now. All right, Melinda Crane, as always, thank you very much.